Michael Jordaan brings a rare combination of banking leadership, digital disruption, and entrepreneurial investing. And he's been one of the speakers at the RMB Think Summit. As a former FNB chief executive and now a tech investor and fintech voice, he understands both the incumbent banking system and the challenges trying to disrupt it if he is called on. So, Michael Jordaan, let me start with this. And I want to reverse engineer the thesis of your talk that you gave up there. And let's go right back to the very beginning. I was fascinated to say that to hear you say the reward often in the fintech space goes to the boring. Explain that to me.
Yeah, look, we try and, there was a time where banking had to be sexy, right? And you wanted to do the latest, the greatest with the best technology that was available. That doesn't work in Africa. In Africa, you've got to innovate for the actual consumer with the actual device that they have, for the actual problem that they really have, not the things that you learn when you do your MBA. And that often is boring stuff. It often means working with regulations, with certifications, and you have to do things at a very, very low cost. So it may be boring, but that's how you win.
But it is happening, but perhaps not happening fast enough. Do we need more boring?
Well, if you take mobile money transactions in Africa, which is by far the biggest part of mobile money transactions in the world, that grew 24% last year. So what's often happening is that these things do grow, they do happen, but we don't always see it from our kind of, shall we call it, the developed world perspective. But there's a bustling economy happening in the informal sector in Africa and in South Africa. You know, people say that the GDP could be 15% or more bigger than we officially measure. And there's entrepreneurialism, there's youth, there are people who are not wedded to the old way of doing things. I think it's very exciting.
You talk about constraint being the moat, and I think you also said that often people are designing for the wrong customer. You've already alluded to that. How do you start designing then for the right customer? How does the mindset need to change?
Well, you've got to be out there. You've got to really understand what happens in the informal settlement. What is the need of people who can't, prove their address because they're not renting, who don't have pay slips because, they're being paid in cash.
And often that cohort is shunted to the margins, right?
That's absolutely right. But if you do understand that they can actually do WhatsApp on a feature phone and that it's possible to do banking using USSD, which doesn't even require data, that the bank branch can be the informal shop that you have on the corner, then there's a whole world of possibilities that start emerging.
So let's talk about that world of possibilities. The traditional banks as we know them, are they innovative enough and moving with speed in the direction that you're suggesting fintechs need to move?
Well, I think I'm going to give you an economist answer, which is a yes and a no. I mean, I think, for example, in South Africa, we have highly sophisticated banks and a highly sophisticated payment system that is certainly meeting the needs of the sophisticated and professional customer base. That's my yes. Where the answer is no is at the bottom end of the market, where you need a completely different set of skills, which, as I said, is very, very low cost, focuses on high volume, and services the customer as they are, not how you want them to be, using the technology that they already have, not the technology that you would like to service them with. And that is actually why the fintechs, the boring fintechs, have rolled up their sleeves and have gotten involved there and are showing fast growth.
How do you close the gap more broadly, though, do you think?
Well, the fintechs are definitely closing it. I think there are now increasing instances where the formal existing incumbents are actually acquiring some of these fintechs. I think that is a theme that we'll see certainly in the next 5 or 10 years still, that as banks remodel their business model, as they clean up their business model, but then expand into these new markets, you'll see the source of earnings and the customer bases of existing banks differ significantly from how they did in the past. I made the point about, the winners are going to be either the fintechs that get distribution or the incumbents that get innovation. I think the race is on, but there are going to be some incumbents that win and some that don't make it, and there are going to be some fintechs that don't make it and some that win.
And the winners are also going to be, as you suggested, those that understand, utilize, and develop artificial intelligence.
Well, that's not just in banking. You're going to have companies that absolutely incorporate AI into everything that they do, and they'll win.
You're dead if you're not.
And the others that don't do it are just not going to be around in 10 years' time. It's just not possible to run a modern business in the absence of AI.
How do businesses get that right then? How do they need to change their mindset and enter into a space which for many of them is unfamiliar and downright frightening?
This is a very interesting new technology. Now, we've had these before. I don't know when the phone came into being, or the fax, or the smartphone, or when Excel spreadsheet became available to accountants. What's different here is that it's much faster, happening much faster, and that it's not just one specific discipline that is being changed, but the entire type of business. How it should be done? I'm one of those that believes it also needs to start at the top. If you're a CEO and you're not visibly demonstrating that you're using AI in everything that you're doing, it's going to be far tougher for the organization to do it. I don't think anyone should feel ashamed of bringing some professionals for training. I had to do many, many hours where a youngster came in and showed me everything that she knew about AI, and she gave me homework. But I'm very, very happy that I've done it, because I've made myself slightly more useful by leaning into AI.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Michael, God bless Gen Z, right? They really are important. One statistic that you quoted in your conversation was 44% of people that are just simply outside the net completely. How do you bring them in?
Well, you make the net much broader than the conventional net, and you do it using all of these interesting things that fintechs do. Again, developing for the devices they have, which are phones. Africa's completely phone-centric, but they're not all smartphones. And then using the technologies that they use, and sometimes that technology is something called cash. It's just a default medium of doing it, and cater for that. Yes, over time you can digitize that cash and bring it all onto the phone, but you have to accept that business is being done in a certain way and solve the problems that the customers actually have, not the problems that you'd like to solve for them.
With all the experience that you've got, if you were building a fintech from scratch right now in 2026, what would you build and what would you avoid?
Well, first of all, I'd start with a tiny team, with a highly competent team. I'd definitely lean into AI and see what can be built using AI, make it incredibly low cost. And then I'd build it behind the banks or behind the mobile operators, or maybe independent wallets. It's incredibly difficult to get the distribution right. So just accept that the distribution has already been built, and then listen to customers, find out what their big problems are, and build that behind the banks. And I think million and billion rand and dollar companies will be built in that way. There are people working from their garages now that are going to make a lot of money with this type of approach.
Thank you very much.
Your trusted source for business and investment insights.